Welcome to Teacher Sparks. I'm Michele Hill. I'm your host, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. Not only did I get to meet this special guest in a conference recently, but I really wanted to meet her because I watched her TED Talk, which was called Your Name is Key. And she was so inspirational, and she just hit home so many points that I really think are so important in working with our students in our classrooms and in our schools altogether. So welcome, Huda Essa. I'm sorry, hold on. Let's do that again. I should have said that. Okay. So welcome, Huda Essa. How are you today?
Hi, Michele. Thank you for having me. How are you doing?
I'm great.
Great.
So tell us about this journey with the TED Talk, because that was really, it was just so profound for me and such a game changer.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. This is something that I had thought about throughout my life, is just this idea of names. And when I was younger, I really struggled with my name because it did sound different compared to my classmates. And I was really ashamed of it. And only when I became older and entered into my adult life was when I started to really think about that concept of, why do I feel ashamed of my name? I really need to learn more about it. And when I did, and I learned the meaning of my name and the stories behind my name, I started to share that with other people, and then I would hear their stories as well. And there are so many stories behind every one of our names. Whether it is that language that it comes from, the ethnic origin it comes from, culturally, why they made that decision, whether it was a family decision, whether that name was changed along the way. And that is something that I've encountered a lot, is where so many people say, well, that's not the name we originally came with, but our family was told, that name isn't going to be accepted here. You need to change it. And that's unfortunate, because when we do change everything so we're all the same, we miss out on those unique stories that we can really learn from. And that's what really pushed me to do that TED Talk. I wanted to share it with more people.
That's awesome. Did you ever go through a time where you referred to yourself as a different name?
I did, yes. You've heard the story. Yeah, when I was younger, because I did not like my name, and for so many reasons, I just felt like it was really strange. And I never saw my name in a book. I didn't see my name in TV or movies. No one else really had my name in the school community that I grew up in. So I decided to change it to something that sounded close enough. So I thought Huda, it's probably closest to Heather. And then my last name, Isa, means Jesus in Arabic. So I went to school the next day and told everyone to call me Heather Jesus. So yeah, that was my name for a little while. It did not last long.
I was going to say, how long did that last? Or not too long?
Not long at all. I think people were like, no, we're not going to do that.
It's funny because I just watched this past weekend Bohemian Rhapsody with Freddie Mercury, and he did very much the same thing. He changed his identity, and there was a part in the movie where the father was so sad because he was giving up not just his name, and we're going to talk about the importance of your name, but his identity of who he was when he gave that up. And so you have this great book which is called Teach Us Your Name, and it's really it's for younger students, but I don't think that the message is lost on older students or even educators as well. So tell us about the impetus to write this book.
Yes. So when I was a classroom teacher for many years, I thought about the struggle that I went through, which I think, this is not a lonely story. So many people have this, where if they feel that their name is uncommon, we get a little nervous when it comes to roll call. Especially on the first day, because it's like, oh, how are they going to say it? And is it going to be embarrassing? And so when I was teaching my students, at the beginning of each year, I would tell them, I want you to teach me how to say your name. I want you to teach me the way your parents say your name. So I'm not just going to call it off and just, go with it. I really want you to teach me how to say it. And, I couldn't get every name right. names come from so many different languages and we don't have all of those same sounds, but I did my best. And it was really fascinating because students whose names were mispronounced for years were starting to hear their names pronounced correctly. And other teachers who would hear their names, they would say, oh my gosh, I've been mispronouncing their name all these years. And they would catch on to it because a lot of kids, they feel embarrassed to even say it, to correct anyone, especially when it comes to adults and teachers. And then the kids, it was amazing because those young children, they have that great ability to pick up sounds from other languages, and they were saying those names perfectly. And they were picking up on those sounds that I couldn't get and other adults couldn't get. So it was really cool to see how kids were starting to take ownership and they were more proud of their names and they were learning these other language sounds, and it started discussions. And I feel like we can all do that. Every school, and even, sometimes people will say, well, my students, a lot of them, they have very common names. Well, there is a story behind that name. Have them go home and ask their parents, where do we originally come from? Do we have ancestors whose names may sound foreign today? Why were those names changed? And sometimes people may go home and find out their parents don't know the answers, and that's a story. Why did we lose that history? Why was that erased and shut away? And what have we all lost from that?
Yeah, it's such a popular topic of conversation right now in light of what's going on, politically in our country. But this goes back for many, many years. My great-grandparents immigrated from Italy, and when they got here, they dropped the two last letters of their last name because they wanted to become more Americanized. And they started giving their children that were born in this country more American names. And so it's funny now because the newer generations in this same family are going back to the old spelling and they're going back to the old names to try to reclaim that heritage, which is so important. But someone's name is who they are. It's their identity. And you and I had this conversation the last time we talked. I had a student who his name is Josue Manjarres, and he called himself Josh Manjarres. And I'm like, do not ever give up your cultural identity to please other people. And he's, it's not a big deal. And for me, it was a very big deal because it's not just changing your name, it's giving up part of who you are culturally.
That's right. That's really right.
Important, right? So,
and he's very fortunate to have had you, Michele, because unfortunately, there's a lot of teachers who they will suggest names to their students and they think that they're helping them out, and I've heard this story so many times. For example, there was a woman who I met who said her name was Angelica. And it's funny, when she gave me her business card, it said Angela. And I said, oh, Angela, and we were talking, and she was talking about the book, and then she said, well, actually, my name is really Angelica. She said, excuse me, I'm nursing a sore throat here. She said, my kindergarten teacher, when she saw my name, she said, Angelica, and I said, no, it's Angelica. And she said, her teacher said, that's too hard, you're Angela from now on. And that was it. She became Angela.
Wow.
And it's not, that is, I've heard that similar story from so many people. And it's not that I believe, their teachers were meaning to be malicious or evil. I really think they just didn't know better. And they thought, well, I'm going to save them some troubles later in life,
A little bit better and make it easier, make their path easier. But we really need to encourage all students, whether they're diverse, whether they're American or not, if they have something that's uncommon, that we need to encourage them to teach people how to say their name and to claim their identity because they're unique. And that's the wondrous part of being an adult, is that you look back and you now know that your uniqueness is something to be proud of, as opposed to be ashamed of. And that's good for kids. So the question I want to ask you is, how much of your influence, your own experience, and your background and how you were treated possibly as a student really gave way to you becoming a prolific advocate for students and teaching about being culturally responsive for educators.
Yeah, I have very vivid childhood memories. It's a little crazy just how much I remember from my childhood, and I remember feeling different. I grew up in a neighborhood where my family was one of the only Muslim and Arab families in that school community, and I felt it. I didn't feel that it was a good thing. Now, there was this statement that I read once. It was just an anonymous quote, but it said, when people don't talk about it, children think it's a secret, and children think secrets are bad. And really, I didn't hear anything mentioned about my identity or my background. So when we always hear about others and we don't really hear anything about ourselves, especially as children, we get the feeling that we're not normal then. Nothing is brought up about our identities. And then, of course, there were specific instances where I faced outright bias as a child. But what happened to me that was a really big wake-up call was later in my college years. And I took a course called Multiculturalism in Education, and it was basically an in-depth course on cultural competency. And it was through that learning that I realized that I myself was a racist and I was prejudiced. And this really shook me to the core, because I thought, how could I have those thoughts about other people when these are things that I've dealt with my whole life and really struggled with? And so I really started to do that learning, and I began to reflect upon what I've been exposed to throughout my life and raise my critical consciousness. And what I realized is that we're not taught to be very empathetic. We're not taught to see ourselves in others and make those connections. And when we're not getting a diverse view of a variety of representation, we will stay limited, and we will have that thinking of, we're talking about the others, and that's why this topic of names, I think, is a great starting point, because, when we've been separated, unfortunately, into these race categories, but if we talk about, for example, when we talk about Caucasians and we just have them all in this one group, well, if we sent all those kids home to go and ask their parents, well, where do we come from originally? And they come back with those stories, how much diversity is there? And when we think about what they may not know and what they could know, what a difference that would have been if they could know it. I did a workshop recently where I asked people to think about where they came from and if they still speak that language, if they still practice those cultural traditions. And of course, the vast majority of people did not. But I had them just really start to think about imagine the innovation and the amazing amount of acceptance and understanding and growth that would occur if every one of those people could speak that other language. And they did have those cultural traditions to share. It would just make us so much more worldly and empathetic. And I mean, the list just is endless.
And it allays a lot of fear that people have. Part of the reason why we have bias or we have racist tendencies is because we're fearful of what we don't know and we don't understand. And it's weird to us or strange to us. And so the more opportunities we have to really get to know other people and their practice, their cultural practices, their languages, and all of that just does enrich us in ways that we couldn't have imagined. And it breaks down that wall that we have of fear that they're different and I'm not going to fit in. So I think it's really, really important. One of the big questions I have, and I can't answer, I could probably give you a couple, but I think you're probably more of the expert, which is what myths surround English language learners in terms of just myths in general, and also myths in practice of how we should educate these students that are diverse.
Sure. Well, it's a great question, and actually extends from what you were just saying, because we have been taught to fear things that are the unknown to us. And we've also been taught to feel very uncomfortable talking about these things. So, our American culture, one of those norms is don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, don't talk about our differences, don't talk about race. And we end up, when we're not having those conversations, we're really limiting ourselves. So when it comes to this topic of language, that's one of those things that unfortunately we have placed so many limitations. I should say society has, in our history has caused for us to have these limitations where we should be a country that embraces language learning and really takes advantage of the amazing diversity that we have here, where people could be multilingual. But because we're not having the conversations, a lot of times people, including educators, we embrace these common beliefs that are actually incorrect. So, for example, I work with a lot of schools throughout the nation, and some of the topics that I cover is about dispelling misconceptions about English language learners and actually viewing it as an asset. And what you'll find is oftentimes teachers, not knowing any better, you don't know what you don't know. And if this is an idea you've absorbed throughout your life, you really feel like you're helping your students, but it's really hurting them in the long run, where they'll tell their parents, the parents of these students, make sure your child is speaking more English at home, because if they keep speaking their other language at home, it's going to impact their ability to learn English proficiently. And this is absolutely the opposite of the truth, because there is no evidence whatsoever to indicate that speaking another language at home will limit your ability to learn English. In fact, speaking more than one language strengthens your metalinguistic awareness. It builds empathy. It builds cultural competence. It helps you to get, increase your chances of being employed later with multiple languages. And it also actually even limits the chances of someone encountering Alzheimer's as they get older, because your brain, the bilingual brain, is, it's this muscle that keeps working. Absolutely. So I think that it's just learning that needs to be done by our educators. And once they do that learning and they start to see, wow, this is actually a gift that I have this child in my classroom, and the other kids can be inspired by it if I just start these conversations. But again, you don't know what you don't know. And I can understand how somebody will get that class list and they say, oh my gosh, I have these English language learners. What am I going to do with them? Because I've got to do things differently for them. But I think that what you do for those students is going to be things that benefit the rest of your class, because it's about vocabulary learning, so.
Give me your top 3 or top 5 strategies that you use to build success with the English language learner in your classroom.
Sure. So one definitely is starting with that name, because that is, you're starting the conversations, and it's starting the conversation with something everyone has. Everyone has a name, and there's a story behind it. And this is also something that teachers can use to connect with their students, because they have a story behind that name too. They might have to do a little digging to learn more about that story, but it's a great one to begin with those students. Talking about languages, that will lead to seeing how it's a benefit of having different language backgrounds, having different national origins. What can we learn about those things? Having students find out, what contributions have people from my national origin made that we're utilizing today? Because even that representation is limited. We're not exposed to a lot of these hidden figures in our history. So having those things, having even the classroom, what is displayed in the classroom, showing diverse, not only languages, but diverse faces, diverse roles, having parents come in and allowing for parents to build their own communities as well, where they're able to speak in their similar language in communicating. Because, unless you've experienced it yourself, where you go to another country and you don't know that language, it's extremely intimidating. And then, layered with the bias that a lot of people already do have when someone's speaking English with a foreign accent, a lot of these parents may look at it and say, you know what, am I doing more damage by coming to the school? Because if people may have those negative biases against me, well, how's it going to translate into how they speak to my child or treat my child, right? So supporting those parents and getting community members involved. And honestly, most of all, really, I think our educators need to do the learning, because they're not bad people. They're good people, and they went into this profession to change lives and to change the world in a positive way. But let's just give them the tools to be able to do so. I think I hit 5.
I totally agree with that in terms of the fact that we are altruistic in nature, that we want to change the world, we want to change students' lives. And so I don't think that there's any malice at all that with students with English language learners, but I just think that there's some common misconceptions on how to do it and what's best for the student. At the end of the day, you really need to create an environment where students and parents, and you bring that up, which is brilliant, don't feel vulnerable, that they feel like they have a strong sense of belonging. And for me, that's so important, to be able to have someone on hand that speaks their language, or to communicate in written form in their language, or even to just have cultural representation in the classroom, and resources for them, so that they look around and they think, she gets it or he gets it, and they want the best for my child. And they also, I guess what we really didn't touch on, but it's building trust. It's building trust with that student and with their parents to say she or he's a good guy, and that they are here for all the right reasons, and that I'm not concerned about leaving my child in their care, because we don't know everyone's backgrounds, and we don't know who has bias, or who legitimately could be a racist who will not treat our students fairly. So we hope that it's no one sitting in a classroom for sure, but I think that that's just a fear that people who don't speak that language just don't know. So they want to know, they want to have that sense of trust. And that starts really with language. It starts with how you treat them with dignity and respect, and representations of their culture and acceptance. And even if you don't speak their language, all of those other things will form a foundation of trust that then the parents get it and say, you know what, they're on our side. They're here for our children and want to do the best by our kids, and so I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think for a lot of the work that I do when I offer these professional development opportunities, Michele, there is a focus of activities based on building empathy, where people get to take part in these activities where they get to actually feel, for example, what it feels like to be speaking English as a foreign language. And you just see people's confidence plummets. Their persona completely changes. Their language becomes choppy. They're looking in different places. And afterwards they say, gosh, I just felt like I could not show my intelligence at all. And I think that that's what happens to a lot of families, where they feel I'm not able to show them how intelligent I am. So what are they thinking about me? But when we go off and say, you know what, though, if I put myself in their position and I had to move to another country, I would love to have the family letters being translated in my language. I would love to have people who spoke English, who I could talk to about my challenges and my triumphs, and building a community there, having a translator, having, just like you said, the teachers and administrators just showing compassion of, we value your voice and we are a team. We're all on the same path here to help your child succeed, and just showing that, right? Because I think a lot of times
it's so important to allow educators to have those firsthand experiences, because like you said, they don't know what they don't know. And if they've never been been in those shoes before, they may not ever know what that feels like.
Yes.
I did go to Mexico many years ago, and I was, learning Spanish because I wanted to teach world language. And I remember at one point just breaking down and crying with the tutor that I had, and he said, "¿Qué pasó?" Like, what's going on? And I'm trying to muddle together in Spanish, how I'm feeling, and I'm like, "Soy inteligente." And he's like, so I'm like, I have these words in English, I don't have them in Spanish.
Yes.
And I remember having that frog in my throat, feeling like I'm going to fall apart here, and I'm an intelligent woman who knows what I want to say, but I can't say it. And so, so that for me, that was an aha moment. It was
absolutely.
This is what these students and these parents feel like when they're here, particularly if they're doing a job that is well beneath the education level that they have, that we see them as the janitor, or we see them, and they could have been, a brain surgeon in their own country. So It's all of those misconceptions. So I think it's so important for every educator at every level, but the superintendent all the way down to, a paraprofessional in the classroom, support person, that they understand how important it is to really wrap your arms around culture and treat it as a really special, wonderful thing, as opposed to something that should be feared or something that you can't talk about.
Absolutely.
And I think that's so key. So I want to thank you today for sharing this conversation with me. I also want to encourage anybody who's watching to this particular episode of Teacher Sparks to really go and search the TED Talk because it was, as I said, it was profound and pivotal for me. And it made such a difference, and it opened the lines of communication for me to then talk to my colleagues about it, because sometimes we need that. Sometimes we need an opening to talk about this and how important it is to know a student's name. I think I told you that I had to read for graduation students' names, and there's some kids who have diverse names, and every day at lunch I would say, "Tell me again how you say your name. Tell me again," until I got it perfect. So that at graduation, the parents were like, she said that very well. But it was practice, because that was important to me, that I represented their culture in front of their families in the way that it should be, and honor their culture. So I hope that everybody checks out your TED Talk, and then I hope they go out and buy your book, because it will translate to all levels in terms of whether it's elementary all the way up to high school, how important it is to just start with letting them teach you their name.
Yes. And I hope even, that the TED Talk, teachers can show those in their classrooms with students. It started so many conversations with a lot of educators that I've worked with that have taken that back to their classrooms and played, I think it's about 15 minutes, and kids started the conversations just listening to it, and they all started talking about it. So I hope to encourage people to talk about it. It's a great way to start.
Well, I'm so excited to have you here today, but I'm more excited to see you again in March at ASCD, where you'll be presenting again about this very important topic. And I hope that people will follow you on Twitter. And
I hope so
you want to give us your Twitter handle?
Sure. It's at Culture Links LLC. And if you also look up my name, HUDA ESSA, it'll come up, but it is at Culture Links LLC. And I'd love to follow people back and see you on there.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here today. And you guys stay tuned for another episode of Teacher Sparks at DisruptED TV. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Michele.